The silence before the shot is what most people don't understand. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's just you, your heartbeat, and the weight of a decision measured in millimeters and milliseconds. A decision that will either save lives or haunt you forever.
I learned that truth the hard way in the mountains outside Kabul. My name is Staff Sergeant Maya Collins, United States Marine Corps, and this is the story of how I became the thing they whispered about in the dark, the legend they called Ghost.
But before I was Ghost, before the name carried weight in briefing rooms and mess halls across Afghanistan, I was just another Marine, smaller than most, quieter than all, the kind of woman officers looked past when assigning critical missions because I didn't fit their mental image of what lethal looked like.
That prejudice almost got a lot of good men killed. Almost, but not quite. Because on one particular night in Kabul, when every tactical decision had gone to hell and an entire squad was seconds from being wiped off the map, I did something that changed everything. Something that made generals who'd never believed in me stand at attention when I walked into a room.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started, to the forward operating base outside Kabul, to the operations tent where careers were made and broken, to the moment when a 2-star general looked at me like I was a mistake that had wandered into his war.
The mountains around FOB Viper had been swallowing patrols whole for 3 straight weeks. Ambushes materialized from nowhere. IEBs turned supply routes into graveyards. Marines who'd walked out strong came back on stretchers, when they came back at all.
Inside the operations tent, the air was thick enough to choke on. Maps covered every surface, marked with red X's that told stories no one wanted to read out loud. Casualty reports stacked up like failed promises, and in the center of it all stood Major General Vincent Rourke, a man whose chest carried more ribbons than most soldiers would earn in 3 lifetimes, whose voice could strip paint off walls, and whose patience for what he called political correctness bullshit had run out somewhere around his 2nd tour in Iraq.
Rourke didn't believe in legends. He believed in results, numbers, body counts, mission completion percentages. And the slim figure standing at the back of his briefing tent, me, didn't look like any of those things. I'd been summoned. That's the word they used. Not requested or invited. Summoned. Like I was some kind of problem that needed addressing before it got worse. The tent was packed. Marines from 1st Battalion clustered around tactical displays, their faces carved from exhaustion and stress. A team of Navy SEALs occupied the far corner, leaning against equipment cases with that particular brand of arrogance that comes from knowing you're the deadliest people in any room. Staff officers shuffled papers and pretended to look busy while stealing glances my direction. They were all waiting for the same thing, waiting to see if the rumors were true, waiting to see if the legend was real or just another piece of combat mythology, the kind of story soldiers tell themselves to make sense of chaos. When I walked in, boots striking the plywood floor in steady rhythm, the reaction was immediate. Marines straightened slightly, their casual conversations dying mid-sentence. The SEALs, men who prided themselves on never being impressed, went quiet just long enough to track my movement across the tent. But it wasn't respect, not yet. It was curiosity mixed with skepticism, the kind of look you give a circus act before it either amazes you or falls flat on its face. One of the SEALs, a big guy with arms like bridge cables and a smirk that probably got him in trouble with officers regularly, leaned toward his teammate. His voice was low, but meant to carry. That's her? That's Ghost? Looks more like a high school track star than a pipe hitter. A few snickers rippled through the SEAL element. One of them made a show of checking his watch, as if my presence was wasting time better spent on actual warriors. I kept my face neutral. I'd heard it all before. Heard it in boot camp when drill instructors asked if I was lost on the way to the Air Force recruiter. Heard it in infantry school when male Marines bet money I'd wash out before the first hike. Heard it every single day since I'd arrived in Afghanistan, and politely declined to stay on the wire doing admin work like a good female Marine should. Words stopped bothering me about the same time I realized I could outshoot, outhike, and outthink most of the men who doubted me. But proving it over and over again, that got old fast. Major General Rourke stood at the head of the operations table, his hands planted on either side of a satellite map of Kabul's northern approaches. He was a big man, not from softness, but from the kind of bulk that comes from a lifetime of physical standards and PT formations. His face was all hard angles and sun damage, his eyes the color of steel left out in winter rain. He looked up when I entered, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge me beyond confirming I was physically present, just returned his attention to the map like I was furniture that had been delivered to the wrong room. "Staff Sergeant," he said without looking up. His voice was gravel and diesel smoke. "You're late." I wasn't. I'd arrived exactly when ordered, but contradicting a 2-star general in front of his staff wasn't how I planned to start this conversation, so I kept my mouth shut and my face blank. "Sir," I said simply, acknowledgement without agreement. Rourke finally straightened, his full attention landing on me like a physical weight. Around the tent, every conversation stopped. Paper stopped shuffling. Even the SEALs went quiet, sensing something about to happen. "Name and unit," Rourke barked. "For the record." It was theater. He knew exactly who I was. My service record sat in a folder on his desk, marked with classifications most people in this tent didn't have clearance to read. But he wanted me to say it, wanted everyone to hear it, wanted to control the narrative before the whispers did. "Staff Sergeant Maya Collins, sir, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion." "Call sign," Rourke said. The words came out flat, but I caught the edge underneath, the challenge, the skepticism wrapped in command authority. The tent went absolutely still. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, the moment when rumor collided with reality, when legend either proved itself or died under scrutiny. I met Rourke's eyes, held them without blinking. Around me, I could feel the weight of attention pressing in from every angle. Marines, SEALs, officers, all of them holding their breath. When I spoke, my voice was calm, level, stripped of emotion or ego, just fact stated plainly, the way you'd give a grid coordinate or confirm a target. Ghost. The word hit the tent like a physical force. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. The big SEAL who'd been smirking earlier sat forward in his chair, the joke dying on his lips. A captain near the front actually took a half-step back as if the name itself carried danger. One of the junior Marines whispered, "Holy shit," under his breath, before his sergeant silenced him with a look. Ghost. The call sign that had been circulating through secure channels for 6 months. The name attached to after-action reports that read like fiction. Solo infiltrations into enemy territory, confirmed kills at distances that defied probability. Entire squads pulled back from the edge of annihilation by a Marine nobody ever saw coming. Some officers had dismissed those reports as exaggeration, soldiers mythologizing survival. But the men who'd been there, the ones who'd walked out of ambushes that should have killed them all, they knew better. They knew Ghost was real, and they knew she was standing right here. Major General Rourke's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, calculation, the unwelcome realization that the problem he'd summoned might be more complicated than he'd anticipated. Ghost, he repeated slowly, tasting the word, testing it. That's quite a reputation for someone who's been in country less than a year. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation wrapped in observation. I didn't flinch. I don't control what people call me, sir. I just do my job. Your job? Rourke's jaw tightened. Your job is to follow orders, Sergeant, not to build a cult of personality that makes my Marines think they need a guardian angel watching over them every time they leave the wire. Around the tent, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The SEALs exchanged glances. Even the most junior Marine in the room understood what was happening. A general was putting a subordinate in her place, publicly, deliberately. But I'd been in enough briefings, enough confrontations, enough moments where powerful men tried to make me small to know the game. I kept my voice steady, my posture correct, my face a mask of professional calm. With respect, sir, my Marines are alive because of the job I do. If that builds a reputation, I'll carry it. If it keeps them breathing, I'll carry anything. The words landed hard, respectful in tone, but unyielding in substance. Several Marines around the tent stood a little straighter, pride flickering across their faces before discipline shut it down. Rourke stared at me for a long moment. I could see him processing, weighing, deciding how to respond to insubordination that wasn't quite insubordination. Finally, he stepped closer, his shadow falling across me, his voice dropping to something quieter, but infinitely more dangerous. Legends get men killed, Sergeant. They make Marines reckless, make them believe someone's invincible. And when that legend fails, when you fail, good men die because they trusted a myth instead of their training. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to prove to me that Ghost is more than smoke and stories. You're going to show me results under my command, following my orders, without the cowboy bullshit that makes soldiers think the rules don't apply. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping further. And if you can't do that, I'll have you on the next transport back to Camp Leatherneck doing inventory for the rest of your deployment. Are we clear? Every eye in the tent was locked on us. The SEALs had stopped smirking. The Marines had stopped breathing. This was a test, and everyone knew it. The kind of test that either broke you or proved you belonged. I held Rourke's stare without blinking. When I spoke, my voice carried across the silent tent with absolute clarity. Crystal clear, sir. Give me the mission. I'll give you results. For just a heartbeat, something flickered in Rourke's expression. Not quite respect, not yet, but acknowledgement, recognition that the woman standing in front of him wasn't going to bend, wasn't going to break, wasn't going to apologize for being exactly what the whispers claimed she was. He straightened, turning back to the map on the table. Good, he said, because I've got a mission that's going to test every bit of that legend. And if you survive it, Sergeant, maybe, just maybe, I'll start believing the stories. The tent remained silent, but in that silence, something had shifted. The legend of Ghost had just collided with the reality of command, and neither one was backing down. The mission brief came exactly 3 hours later. Not enough time to rest, barely enough time to check weapons and refill canteens. That was deliberate. Rourke wanted to see how I performed under pressure, without preparation, without the luxury of overthinking. The target, Recon Team Delta, 8 Marines who'd gone dark in Kabul's northern sector 40 minutes ago. Last known position was a cluster of compounds near the old brick factories, a maze of narrow alleys and crumbling buildings that had swallowed 3 patrols in the past month. Intel suggested heavy Taliban presence. Radio silence suggested worse. In military terms, this was a nightmare scenario. In practical terms, it was a death sentence being handed to whoever was stupid or brave enough to accept it. Rourke stood at the front of the briefing room, pointer in hand, tapping the map where Delta's last transmission had originated. Around him, the same Marines and SEALs from earlier watched with faces that had shifted from mockery to something harder to read. Concern, maybe? Or morbid curiosity about whether the legend would survive her first real test under Rourke's command. Satellite imagery shows significant movement in this sector, Rourke said, his voice clinical and detached. At least 40 fighting-age males, possibly more. Weapon signatures consistent with PKM machine guns, RPGs, and small arms. The buildings provide excellent concealment and interlocking fields of fire.
He paused, letting that sink in. 40-plus enemy fighters in urban terrain designed for ambush, against whoever we could scramble in the next 20 minutes.
Rules of engagement are weapons-free once contact is initiated. Mission priority is recovery of Delta Team, alive if possible. Air support is unavailable due to weather. He glanced at me. Questions, Sergeant Collins?
I studied the map, running calculations in my head. Distance, terrain, probable enemy positions based on previous ambush patterns. The tactical picture was ugly. Whoever went in would be outnumbered at least 4-1, moving through unfamiliar ground against an enemy who'd had time to prepare.
It was exactly the kind of mission designed to prove I was just hype. The kind that would either validate the legend or bury it permanently. Time hack on Delta's last transmission? I asked. 43 minutes ago. Voice contact reported heavy contact, then nothing. 43 minutes. In combat terms, that was a lifetime. They could already be dead. Probably were. This might not be a rescue. It might be a body recovery that would cost more lives than it saved. I looked at Rourke directly. I'll need a small team. 4 Marines, max. People who can move quiet and shoot straight. One of the SEALs in the back, the big one who'd mocked me earlier, let out a short laugh. 4 Marines against 40 Taliban? That's not tactics, that's suicide. I turned to face him, met his eyes without hostility or defensiveness, just stated fact. 5 of us are harder to spot than 20. We're not going in to fight 40 Taliban. We're going in to extract 8 Marines before those 40 realize we're there.
And if they do realize, the SEAL pressed, then I'll make sure they're too busy dealing with me to worry about anyone else. The words hung in the air. Not bravado, not arrogance, just cold calculation, delivered with the certainty of someone who'd done this before and survived. Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly. You're proposing a stealth insertion. I'm proposing we use the enemy's assumptions against them. They're expecting a convoy, heavy response, lots of noise and firepower. They won't be watching for a small element moving through their blind spots. You know their blind spots? Rourke's tone carried skepticism.
I've studied every ambush in this sector for the past 6 months, sir. I know how they set up. I know where they don't look. I paused. And I know how to move through the places they think are impossible. For a long moment, Rourke said nothing. He studied me, the way a poker player studies an opponent, looking for tells, for cracks, for evidence of bluffing. Finally, he nodded once. Pick your team. You've got 15 minutes. And Sergeant, he leaned forward slightly, if you get those Marines killed trying to prove you're ghost, I'll make sure that legend dies with you. Understood, sir.
12 minutes later, I stood in the armory with 4 Marines I'd handpicked. Not the biggest, not the loudest, but the ones I'd watched on previous patrols. The ones who moved like they understood that combat was as much about thinking as shooting. Corporal Jesse Ramos, 24, from Houston, 3rd deployment. Best natural sense of terrain I'd ever seen. He read ground the way some people read books. Lance Corporal Tai Chen, 22, from San Francisco, sniper qualified, patient as stone and twice as quiet. Private First Class Derek Hall, 19, from rural Montana, grew up hunting, moved through brush like he was part of it. And Sergeant Marcus Webb, 31, from Detroit, veteran of Fallujah, the kind of Marine who'd seen enough chaos to stay calm when everything went to hell. They stood in a loose circle, checking weapons, faces serious but not afraid. They knew what we were walking into. They'd volunteered anyway. Listen up, I said, keeping my voice low and level. We're going into a shitstorm. 40-plus enemy fighters, complex terrain, 0 support. Our job is to find Delta Team and get them out before the Taliban realizes we're there. And if they realize? Webb asked. Same question the SEAL had posed, but without the mockery. Then we adapt. But our priority isn't fighting, it's extraction. We move quiet, we move smart, and we don't engage unless we have no other choice. I met each of their eyes in turn. Anyone unclear on that? 4 head shakes. No questions, no doubts. Good. Mount up. We roll in 5.
The northern sector of Kabul looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. Buildings gutted by years of war, streets cratered by IEDs, walls pockmarked with bullet holes that told stories in metal and stone. The few civilians who remained watched from doorways with eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little.
Our vehicle, a single up-armored Humvee, deliberately stripped of the usual convoy support, rolled to a stop 3 blocks from Delta's last known position, far enough to avoid immediate detection, close enough that we could reach them on foot in under 10 minutes.
If they were still alive, I stepped out first, rifle up, scanning rooftops and windows with eyes trained to spot the micro-movements that preceded ambush. Behind me, my team dismounted and practiced silence, spacing themselves automatically, each Marine covering a different sector. The air smelled like burning trash and cordite. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Otherwise, silence. The wrong kind of silence. The kind that meant people were hiding, waiting, watching.
Ramos, you've got point, I said quietly. Chen, tail end Charlie. Everyone else, stagger formation. We move slow and we move quiet. Ghost protocol. They'd heard the term before. It meant no talking, no unnecessary movement, hand signals only. It meant becoming shadows that the enemy's eyes slid past without registering. It meant trusting that the woman leading them knew exactly what she was doing. We moved into the labyrinth.
The streets of northern Kabul were a tactical nightmare. Narrow alleys that forced single-file movement. Intersections with zero visibility until you were standing in the middle of them. Buildings that could hide a dozen fighters or none at all. Every corner was a potential kill zone. Every shadow could conceal death.
But I'd studied this terrain, spent hours analyzing drone footage, after-action reports, patterns of previous ambushes. I knew which alleys the Taliban preferred for firing positions, which buildings offered the best sightlines, which routes they considered too exposed, too dangerous for American forces to use.
Those were the routes I chose.
We moved through a collapsed section of wall that required climbing over rubble most units would avoid, crawled through a drainage culvert that stank of sewage but offered concealment from the overlooking buildings, crossed an open courtyard one at a time during the precise moments when the shifting shadows from overhead power lines created visual disruption.
It was slow, agonizing, every muscle tensed, every sense heightened, waiting for the crack of gunfire that would mean we'd been spotted. But it didn't come. Ramos signaled from ahead. Contact. He'd spotted something. I moved forward, low and quiet, until I was beside him. He pointed toward a 3-story building about 50 meters ahead. On the roof, barely visible, 2 figures with rifles. Not actively scanning, just waiting, watching the main street below.
Enemy overwatch position, which meant we were close. I signaled the team, hold position. Then I studied the building, the angles, the approach. There was a blind spot on the eastern side where a partially collapsed wall created a visual break. If we moved through it, we could get past the overwatch without being seen.
But that would take us deeper into enemy territory, closer to wherever Delta Team was pinned, closer to the center of the hornet's nest. I made the call. We move. It took 8 minutes to navigate around that building, 8 minutes of frozen silence, controlled breathing, movement so slow they barely qualified as motion. But we made it. And on the other side, I finally heard what I'd been listening for. Voices. Low. Urgent. Speaking Pashto. I held up a fist. Freeze. The team went absolutely still.
The voices were coming from a compound ahead, a cluster of buildings around a central courtyard. I caught fragments of conversation, picked up through years of language training. Americans, still alive, waiting for dark.
My jaw tightened. Delta Team was in there, alive, surrounded, and the Taliban were planning to hit them after sunset when thermal optics would give the enemy advantage. We had maybe 20 minutes of daylight left. I pulled my team into a tight circle, whispered so quietly they had to lean in to hear. Delta's in that compound, probably wounded, definitely pinned. Enemies waiting for dark to finish them. How many hostiles? Webb breathed.
Can't tell, but from the voices, at least a dozen in the immediate area, probably more on Overwatch. Shit, Hall whispered. Yeah, I looked at each of them. We can't fight through that many, but we don't have to. We just need to create enough chaos that Delta can move. 30 seconds of confusion, that's all. How? Chen asked.
I pulled out the single fragmentation grenade each of us carried. We use these. Staggered detonation. Make them think they're being hit from multiple sides. While they're reacting, we slip in, grab Delta, and ghost out before they reorganize.
Ramos shook his head slightly. That's insane. You have a better idea? Silence. Because he didn't. None of us did. All right, Webb said quietly. Let's be insane together.
I positioned my team at 4 different points around the compound, each with line of sight to a different section. The plan was simple, brutal, and had about 100 ways to go wrong. On my signal, we'd throw grenades simultaneously into different parts of the compound. The coordinated explosions would make the Taliban think they were under assault from a much larger force. In the chaos, I'd move in alone, locate Delta, and guide them out while my team provided covering fire. Simple, except for the part where I'd be running through the middle of 40 enemy fighters while explosions went off around me. I checked my watch. 17 minutes of daylight left. I keyed my radio. Single click. Ready signal. 4 clicks came back. Everyone in position. I took a breath. Let the world narrow down to this moment. This decision. This roll of the dice with 8 Marine lives hanging in the balance. I pulled the pin on my grenade, counted 3, and threw. The world exploded. 4 grenades detonated within 2 seconds of each other, each one hitting a different section of the compound. The noise was enormous, multiplied by the enclosed space, echoing off walls and creating the acoustic signature of a much larger attack.
Shouts erupted in Pashto, confusion, panic, the sharp crack of rifles firing blindly at shadows. I didn't wait. I ran. I moved through the smoke and dust like I'd been born in it, rifle up, eyes scanning. The compound was chaos. Fighters running toward firing positions, trying to identify threats, shouting contradictory orders. They were looking outward, expecting attack from beyond the walls. They weren't looking for the one Marine moving toward the center. I found Delta Team in a shot-up building at the compound's heart. 8 Marines, 3 wounded, all of them looking like they'd been through a meat grinder. They had their rifles pointed at the doorway I came through, fingers on triggers, until they saw my American uniform and the call sign patch on my chest. The team leader, a staff sergeant with blood running down his face, stared at me like I was a hallucination. "Who the hell are you?" "You're right out," I said. "Can your wounded walk?" "We'll make 'em walk." "Good, because we've got about 30 seconds before they figure out this isn't a full assault. Follow me. Stay tight. Stay quiet. And for God's sake, don't shoot my team on the way out." Outside, the chaos was beginning to organize. Taliban fighters were starting to realize the explosions hadn't been followed by sustained fire. Confusion was giving way to calculation. Our window was closing. I led Delta Team back the way I'd come, moving fast now, trading stealth for speed. Behind us, I could hear shouts getting closer. Someone had found the building where Delta had been. Someone was organizing pursuit. My team materialized from the shadows like ghosts, exactly like ghosts, falling into position around the wounded. Ramos took point. Chen dropped back to tail. Webb and Hall supported the injured Marines who couldn't move fast enough on their own. We ran. And behind us, The compound erupted as the Taliban realized their prisoners were escaping.
The first burst of gunfire came 30 seconds after we cleared the compound, rounds snapping past our heads, ricocheting off stone walls with that distinctive metallic whine that means someone's shooting at you with serious intent.
"Contact rear," Chen shouted, dropping to one knee and returning fire in controlled bursts. His rifle barked 3 times, 3 precise shots that bought us maybe 5 seconds as the pursuing Taliban ducked for cover.
We kept moving. The wounded Marines stumbled forward, adrenaline overriding pain, their teammates half carrying, half dragging them through the narrow alleys. Every breath was labored. Every step felt like it took an hour. And behind us, the sounds of pursuit were getting louder, more organized.
They knew we were a small team now, knew we were burdened with wounded, knew they had us outnumbered and could run us down if they pressed hard enough. I scanned ahead, mind racing through options. The route back to our vehicle was 3 blocks north, 3 blocks of open street with 0 cover and perfect sight lines for enemy shooters. We'd never make it. Not with wounded, not with 40 fighters behind us. Which meant I needed to change the equation. "Ramos," I called. "Take them north, fast as you can. Get to the Humvee." He glanced back, understanding dawning on his face. "What about you?" "I'm buying you time. Move." Webb grabbed my shoulder. "Ghost, you can't." "That's an order, Sergeant. Get these Marines home. I'll catch up." It was a lie. We both knew it, but there wasn't time to argue. Every second we stood here debating was a second closer to everyone dying. Webb's jaw tightened. Then he nodded once and turned to the team. "You heard her. Move, move, move." They ran. I watched them disappear around a corner. Chen supporting a wounded Marine, Hall carrying another, Ramos leading them through the maze of alleys I'd mapped in my head weeks ago. They'd make it. If I did my job right, they'd make it.
I turned to face the pursuit. There's a concept in military tactics called economy of force. It means using the minimum combat power necessary to accomplish a mission, so you can deploy your main effort elsewhere. Most people think of it in terms of large units, battalions, companies, platoons. But it works on an individual level too. I was one Marine, but I was one Marine who knew this terrain, who'd studied Taliban tactics until I could predict their movements, who'd spent months learning to read urban combat the way a chess master reads a board. One Marine in the right position could tie down 40 fighters long enough for 8 others to escape. I climbed. The building beside me had partially collapsed, but the stairwell was intact. I took the steps 2 at a time, rifle held tight, breathing controlled despite the sprint. 3 floors up, I found what I needed. A corner room with windows facing 3 different directions and a partial wall I could use for cover. Perfect Overwatch position. I moved to the eastern window, took a knee, and waited. The Taliban came around the corner exactly where I expected. A cluster of fighters moving fast, weapons up, focused on the street ahead where they thought we'd fled. They were bunched together, undisciplined, confident they had us running scared. I proved them wrong. My first shot dropped the lead fighter before the sound of my rifle even registered. My second shot took the man beside him. By the third shot, they were scattering, shouting, diving for cover, trying to figure out where the fire was coming from. I shifted to the north window. Another group was trying to flank through a parallel alley. I put 2 rounds into the wall above their heads, not trying to kill, just trying to make them think twice about moving forward. They froze, unsure, caught between aggression and self-preservation. Economy of force. Make them believe they're facing more resistance than they are. Make them hesitate. Make them afraid. I moved to the south window. More fighters were pouring out of the compound now, but they were moving cautiously, using cover, scanning rooftops. They'd learned I was above them. Good. That meant they were looking up instead of chasing my team.
My radio crackled. Ramos's voice, distant and staticky. "Ghost, we're at the vehicle. Wounded loaded. Where are you?" "Still shopping," I said, squeezing off 2 more rounds at movement in the street below. "Get out of here. Now."
We're not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're following orders. Get those Marines back to base. That's the mission. Silence on the radio. Then Webb's voice, quiet and heavy. Don't die, Ghost. That's an order. Copy that, I said, and meant it.
The Humvee's engine roared to life in the distance. I heard it pull away, tires crunching gravel, moving fast toward safety. 8 Marines who would have died in that compound were going home. The mission was complete.
Now, I just had to survive it. The Taliban weren't stupid. Once they realized the Humvee was gone and I was alone, they changed tactics, stopped rushing, started coordinating. I watched them through the windows, saw the way they moved, the hand signals passing between groups.
They were setting up a perimeter, surrounding the building, preparing to either wait me out or burn me out. I had maybe 10 minutes before they organized enough to rush the stairwell. 10 minutes to figure out how to escape from a building with 40 armed men around it, in a city I barely knew, with no support and no backup. The smart play was to surrender, throw down my weapon, put my hands up, take my chances as a prisoner of war. I'd probably survive. Female Marines were valuable propaganda, and the Taliban knew it. But I'd also seen what they did to prisoners before they decided to trade them. Seen the photos and intelligence briefings. Seen the things they considered acceptable treatment. I'd rather die fighting. So I started looking for options. The roof had partial collapse. Maybe I could climb across to the next building. The back wall had a window facing an alley that might not be covered yet. There was a drainage pipe running down the exterior that might hold my weight if I moved fast enough.
All bad options, but bad options were better than no options. I was checking the structural integrity of the drainage pipe when I heard it, a sound that made every Taliban fighter in the street below freeze and look up. The deep, unmistakable roar of an A-10 Warthog.
The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately called the Warthog by the pilots who flew it, is not a beautiful aircraft. It's ugly, slow, and built around a gun so big they had to design the plane around it instead of the other way around. But to ground troops in contact, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. And right now, one of them was screaming across the Kabul sky at an altitude so low I could see the pilot's helmet. My radio crackled, a new voice, calm and professional. "Ghost, this is Hawkeye 3-1. I understand you could use a ride home." I nearly laughed, nearly cried, settled for keying my mic and saying, "Hawkeye, this is Ghost. That's the best offer I've had all day." "Copy that. I've got you visual. You're the only idiot on that rooftop, right?" "That's me." "Good, because what I'm about to do is really going to piss off everyone who isn't you. Recommend you get away from the windows and cover your ears." I didn't need to be told twice. I dropped flat in the center of the room, hands over my ears, mouth open to equalize pressure. The Warthog's GAU Avenger cannon opened up with a sound like the sky tearing in half. Brrrt! That distinctive, unholy roar as 30mm rounds tore through the air at 3,900 rounds per minute. The street below erupted, concrete exploded, walls disintegrated. Taliban fighters who'd been confidently surrounding my position seconds ago scattered like insects, running for any cover they could find. The Warthog made one pass, then circled back for another and another, each run lasting only a few seconds, but each one carving a path of absolute destruction through the enemy positions. Hawkeye's voice came back, still calm. "Ghost, you've got about 30 seconds before they reorganize. East side of your building, there's a Humvee with some very worried Marines. Suggest you get to them quickly." I was already moving. Down the stairs, rifle up, heart pounding. I hit the ground floor and saw them. Ramos, Webb, Chen, and Hall, standing beside the Humvee they absolutely should have used to escape, every weapon pointed outward. Faces set in that expression that said they'd decided dying with their sergeant was better than living without her. "I thought I gave you an order,"
I shouted as I ran toward them. "We got lost on the way back to base," Ramos shouted back, grinning like an idiot. Terrible sense of direction. I wanted to scream at them, wanted to hug them, settled for diving into the Humvee and yelling, "Drive, now!"
Webb slammed the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, tires screaming. Behind us, the A-10 made one more pass, its cannon roaring like the voice of an angry god. We didn't stop driving until we were through the gates of FOB Viper.
The operations tent was silent when I walked in 2 hours later. Word had spread faster than radio signals. Ghost had walked into the worst tactical situation imaginable, pulled out 8 Marines who should have been dead, and walked out alive herself. Major General Rourke stood at the same table where he'd questioned me hours earlier. The maps were still there, the casualty reports were still there, but now there was something else, a preliminary after-action report from Delta Team's leader. Rourke read it. Then he looked up at me. Really looked, not with skepticism or judgment, but with something I hadn't seen from him before. Respect. "Staff Sergeant Collins," he said formally. The entire tent went quiet. Marines, SEALs, officers, everyone stopped what they were doing. Work continued, his voice carrying. "Delta Team is alive because of your actions today. Every single Marine walked out of that compound. 0 KIA, 0 critical casualties."
He paused, then added more quietly, "I've been in this uniform for 32 years. I've seen a lot of brave things, a lot of stupid things, and sometimes when you're lucky, you see something that's both brave and brilliant at the same time."
He picked up something from the table, a patch, black background with silver lettering, Ghost.
I don't believe in legends, Sergeant. I believe in results. Today, you gave me results. He held out the patch. You've earned this. And more importantly, you've earned the right to wear it without anyone in this command questioning whether you deserve it.
I took the patch, feeling its weight in my hand. Around the tent, Marines were standing at attention. Even the SEALs, the ones who'd mocked me hours earlier, stood with expressions of respect. The big SEAL who'd made the crack about high school track stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said formally, "I owe you an apology, and if you ever need someone to watch your six, I'd be honored." I met his eyes, saw genuine respect there, nodded once. Apology accepted, and I might take you up on that.
Rourke cleared his throat. "Dismissed, Sergeant. Get some rest. Something tells me you'll have more work soon enough." I saluted. He returned it sharply. And for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd proven enough. That night, I sat outside the barracks under the Afghan stars, the same stars I'd seen 1,000 times before. The patch Rourke had given me rested in my hand, its edges sharp and new. Ghost, the call sign I'd earned not through ego or showboating, but through countless nights of moving through darkness, through firefights where staying invisible meant staying alive, through decisions that balanced risk and reward on the edge of a knife. Footsteps approached. Webb sat down beside me without asking permission. For a while we just sat there, 2 Marines who'd seen too much and somehow survived it. "You know they're going to expect miracles every time now," he said finally. "I know. You know that's not sustainable." "I know that too, and you're going to do it anyway." I looked at the patch in my hand. "As long as it brings Marines home, yeah, I am." Webb nodded slowly. "Then I guess we better make sure you don't have to do it alone." Over the next weeks, the legend grew. Not because I wanted it to, but because word spreads fast in combat zones. Delta Team told their story. My team told theirs. Pilots like Hawkeye 3-1 added their versions. And with each telling, the name Ghost became less about me and more about what it represented. Hope. The belief that even in the worst situations, even when the odds were impossible, there was someone who could find a way through. Someone who'd walk into hell to bring you home. I didn't ask for that responsibility, but I carried it anyway,
because that's what Marines do. We carry the weight, we take the risk, and we bring our people home. The award ceremony was small, private, held in a secure location with no media present. That's how it went with classified operations. You got the medal, but nobody got to know why.
Major General Rourke pinned the Navy Cross to my uniform, the nation's second highest award for valor in combat. The citation was carefully worded, vague enough to protect operational security, specific enough that anyone who'd been there knew exactly what it was for.
For extraordinary heroism in combat operations against enemy forces. But the real award came afterward, when Rourke pulled me aside, away from the ceremony, and said quietly, "I was wrong about you, Collins. I thought legends were dangerous, thought they made soldiers reckless." He paused, choosing his words carefully. But what I didn't understand is that the best legends aren't about being invincible. They're about being relentless, about refusing to quit when quitting is the easy choice, about carrying the weight so others don't have to. He met my eyes. "You're not dangerous because you're a legend, Sergeant. You're a legend because you're exactly what every Marine should be. And I'm honored to have you in my command." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and said, "Thank you, sir." Later, as I walked across the base, I passed groups of Marines, young ones, fresh from the States, barely old enough to shave. They saw the patch on my shoulder, Ghost, and their conversation stopped. One of them, a private who couldn't have been older than 19, worked up the courage to approach me. "Ma'am," he said nervously, "is it true, what they say about you?" I looked at him, saw the fear in his eyes, the uncertainty that comes with being young and far from home in a place where people are trying to kill you. Saw the hope, too, the desperate need to believe that someone knew what they were doing, that survival was possible, that going home was more than just luck. "What do they say?" I asked gently. "That you've never lost a Marine, that you always bring everyone home." I could have told him the truth, that luck played as much a role as skill, that I'd been terrified in that building in Kabul, that every mission was a gamble I might lose someday. Could have told him that legends were just stories people told to make sense of chaos. But I looked at his young face and I understood what he really needed. Not honesty, not reality. He needed hope. So I told him what I wished someone had told me before my first deployment. I've never lost a Marine because I refuse to, because every person out there is someone's son or daughter, someone's brother or sister, and I fight like hell to make sure they get home to the people who love them. You want to know the secret to surviving out here? It's not about being fearless. It's about taking care of the Marine beside you. Watch their back, they'll watch yours, and together, you'll all make it home. The private stood a little straighter. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." As he walked away, I heard him telling his buddies what I'd said, heard the hope in his voice, heard the way he repeated, "Never lost a Marine," like it was a promise instead of a track record. And I felt the weight settle on my shoulders again, the weight of expectation, the weight of being Ghost. But I didn't resent it, because if carrying that weight meant young Marines believed they could survive, if it meant they fought harder to protect each other, if it meant one more person made it home to their family, then it was worth it. I'm a civilian now, retired from the Marines after 3 deployments and a career that reads like fiction to people who weren't there. I work as a consultant, training special operations forces in urban tactics and small unit leadership. Sometimes I speak at military academies, telling sanitized versions of stories that still carry classification stamps. I talk about decision-making under pressure, about leading by example, about the responsibility that comes with being someone others look up to. And always, always, someone asks about the legend, about Ghost, about whether the stories are true. I tell them what I told that young private in Kabul. Legends aren't about being superhuman. They're about being human enough to refuse to quit, about caring more about your mission than your fear, about understanding that every decision you make carries the weight of lives in the balance.
The call sign Ghost doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to every Marine who's ever walked into darkness to bring someone home. Every soldier who's ever put themselves between their teammates and danger. Every person who's ever decided that someone else's life was worth more than their own comfort or safety.
That's what the legend really means. Not that one person is invincible, but that the spirit of service, the refusal to leave anyone behind, is stronger than any enemy, any obstacle, any fear.
I carried that spirit through 3 deployments, brought home every Marine I was sent to find, earned a chest full of medals that sit in a box somewhere, because the real award was watching those Marines hug their families when they came home.
And if there's one thing I want people to understand about military service, about courage, about what it really means to be a legend, it's this. You don't have to be the biggest. You don't have to be the loudest. You don't have to fit anyone's image of what a hero looks like. You just have to refuse to quit when quitting is easy. You have to care more about results than recognition. You have to be willing to walk into hell because someone needs you to. And if you do that, if you serve with that kind of commitment, then maybe someday someone will whisper your name with the same reverence I heard in that operations tent. Not because you're a legend, but because you refuse to let good people die when you could do something about it. That's what Ghost really means.
And that legacy, that spirit, lives on in every service member who's ever put the mission above themselves.
If this story moved you, if it made you think about courage and sacrifice, and what it really means to lead when lives are on the line, leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Share your own stories of people who refused to quit when quitting was the easy choice. And subscribe, because there are more stories like this. Stories of ordinary people who became extraordinary when the moment demanded it. Stories that remind us that heroes aren't born. They're forged in the fire of impossible decisions and carried forward by the refusal to abandon the people counting on them. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and never forget that the greatest warriors aren't the ones who never feel fear. They're the ones who feel it and move forward anyway.